Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host, Sana Maqbool, with you at PTV WORLD. In today's show, we will be talking about two very important stories. The first story is with reference to what is going on in India. We've discussed at length the banning on hijab in schools, something that has led to a lot of controversy in India and a lot of debate with regards to whether or not it is essential to Islam or not. And now the Indian court has upheld the Karnataka state's ban on hijab, saying that it is not essential to Islam. There is also discussion around the option of exercising restriction on clothing in terms of a uniform in schools or not, and so also extending the same argument to this situation as well, of course not taking into account religious sentiments, and something that has the potential impact of spreading throughout the country as well. We've seen a lot of hue and cry regarding this as well. A lot of people have stood up, but again we've seen that what the decision has come forward with is not in line with the sentiments of the people in India. The kind of impact this is going to have in India and in other parts of the world will be discussed in this show as well. We also know that today is the International Day Against Islamophobia, and this is an important aspect to highlight with reference to that as well, because it's not just in India that such discrimination has been taking place. In other parts of the world, such as France, such discrimination has also taken place, and there has been these bans and institutionalized steps against a particular segment of the society, discriminating against their religion and not letting them practice it freely. So we're going to discuss in detail what can be done in this regard. Pakistan, of course, has been very vocal on Islamophobia, and we're going to see what other measures can be taken in this regard. Our second segment is with reference to misinformation and propaganda, something that the Chief of Army Staff has talked about in Lahore recently, and he spoke about how this must be met with a collective response, and he also pointed out the potential that the youth have, and that we need to be developing the human population in the country. What really can be done with regards to propaganda campaigns, what is the collective response that is needed, and how we can cater to that internationally as well, is what we're going to explore in our second segment. For our first segment, of course, we have with us Farrukh, Pitafi and Raja Faisal. I'm so happy to have all the team together back once again. And we have for our first segment two special guests online as well, Ms. Shiba Aslam Femi, who's an Indian journalist and research scholar, and Dr. John Dayal, who's an Indian writer and activist. They've joined us for the first segment. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us. I'll start with you, Dr. John Dayal. Something that we've discussed before as well in terms of the ban on hijab in Karnataka, and now we know that the court has upheld this ruling as well. This, of course, has serious impact on the way the student population specifically, and then the larger population in general in India is going to be dealt with, not only by the police or other institutions, but also by the public at large, as we've seen before in videos that have gone viral as well. How difficult and narrow do you think life has been made for the students, especially girls, in institutions in Karnataka and other parts of India?
To begin with, the scene of action is shifted to the Supreme Court. One of the students who had filed a writ in the High Court has already this afternoon moved the Supreme Court. And by tomorrow, I think almost everybody will come to the Supreme Court, which then may take its own time to discuss this. Summer vacations are there from about May, early May, but the problem is that the Chief Justice is retiring later this year, and his judgments recently have been progressive, so there would possibly be some hope that if the Supreme Court is to take a larger look and a fresh look at the whole issue of the hijab, particularly as it has been raised in school uniforms, that maybe there would be a chance that the Karnataka decision would be overturned. But we also, another new attribute is a slight aggravation in the political environment in India after the BJP's victory in the 4 state elections, which has shown a hardening of attitudes, which has shown a widening of cleavage. And as you said about Islamophobia, which has shown an aggravation of the Islamophobic environment in which we have been living now for the last 8 years or so. So in this collective cocoon, a bubble how will things play out? I must tell you that all of us, although we were expecting that the Karnataka High Court will rule as it eventually did, but we were, of course, very disappointed. Maybe only
Right.
that section.
Right, Ms. Sheba. When we talk about this decision, of course, we also need to explore the argument behind the decision. And what has been said is that it is not essential to Islam, and the fact that that uniforms and the restriction on clothing in terms of a uniform is perhaps something that is okay to put on students and the population who are studying in institutions. Is that so? And is this a justification that really can be put on this matter? Because of course this is also a basic right of each citizen to be able to practice their religion.
Thank you very much, PTV. This is a very dicey situation for an Indian Muslim woman like myself who doesn't sport or wear hijab or any kind of headgear in the name of religion. Um, my worry or our worry, people like myself were worried, what if the Karnataka High Court accepted it as an essential practice of Islam? We all understand that the essential practices, there are five essential practices and the five pillars of Islam, that is kalma, uh, namaz, roza, zakat, hajj, and even hajj is conditional. So beyond that, if we go on interpreting Islam, which is a book-based religion, everything is written in black and white. If we go on interpreting and adding, which we call bid'ah, and adding certain things to suit our political agendas, it is not going to, serve anybody's interest. As a Muslim woman of India, I am worried about one thing, that is how, if it is accepted as an essential practice, how it is going to be played out to the whole of the Muslim society in India. And there are clusters such a variety and such layers of society within Muslims in India. From Kashmir to Kanyakumari, we have a society that lives in 18th century, that lives in 20th century, that lives in 22nd century. So we have to understand that in such a society, you cannot have such a blanket injunction from court where it says that it is an essential practice. What would happen to all those women, the professors, the teachers, the scientists,
But
the
what about
pilots,
choice?
all these doctors? So, come again, please.
What about choice?
And
I'm coming
And
to that. I'm
Farrukh,
coming to that.
this is something that we've discussed earlier as well.
That is one aspect. Yeah.
Yes, I'll
So
come to you, Ms.
choice-
Sheba. Farrukh, when we talk about what the choice factor, then principally both of the statements are something that we support in terms of being able for them to be able to exercise the right to wear or to not wear the hijab.
right, I must first apologize because I didn't catch most of what was said by Ms. Sheba, although I did follow Dr. Dayal, and I have a question for him as well. But regarding how this played out, we note a few dynamics which were there on ground. A, there was a lot of influence of hard right groups, especially Hindu hard right groups, to seek a certain kind of verdict, right? We know that there was violence on the street. We know that there were people who actually captured schools, and there was a replacement of India's Tiranga or tricolor with Hindutva Bhagwa, right? And that happened before everybody else. So there was pressure. Secondly, how the case was built. My problem is that it is essentially, to me at least, it is about a woman's right to choose.
Exactly.
Right? The biggest problem is that when the petitioners went to the court, they were actually seeking something else. They were actually invoking religious clauses rather than their freedom. Now, there is a third aspect as well, and that is about the concept of uniformity. When you are wearing a uniform, you are supposed to be uniform, right? And there is a reason behind that as well, that you have to actually, before the school, all students are equal. But here's a problem. You're talking about not school, you're talking about a college, and you're talking about girls who are almost or really adults. So there you have to have choices, and this is a question. Earlier there was an argument that was given that there are girls from Hindu community who want to wear saffron, scarves.
Right.
So what is wrong with that?
Yeah,
Let them wear that as
exactly.
well, right? a woman should have right to wear whatever she wants, provided it doesn't actually offend the sensibilities of the society. At least this is what our laws and cultures have been saying. With your permission, allow me to go to Dr. Dayal. Dr. Dayal, you must be following the legal arguments as well. I'm a bit intrigued about the post-colonial jurisprudence, and I wanted you to tell us, how do you see the merits of the arguments that were presented in the case, sir?
One of the advantages of COVID was that the Karnataka court proceedings were televised. And I sort of stuck to the TV, to my laptop for several of those days, particularly when the major advocates were arguing. And I think it was educational. And it was educational not only to lawyers and those interested in law, but also I think to tens of thousands, if not lakhs, of students, Muslim students as well as other students who saw arguments on both sides and saw, as you said, the post-colonial law still being referred to. And I'm afraid it will be referred to for the next 50 years or so. The judgment itself refers to pretty archaic laws from America and Britain on this. But sir, if I may answer another aspect of the question that we have never been arguing for an archaic or a classical patriarchal religion to be enforced on anyone, including myself as a Catholic. But the element of choice and how this feeds into the forces that are trying to narrow down the limits of religious freedom in India. We cannot divorce it from there. And it was on that issue that most of us, the so-called liberals, who have been parodied and harassed from both sides, have been arguing this case. It remains on the parents of the child what she wishes to do. But this must not be used to narrow down the entire aspect of freedom of religion.
Yeah. Shiba, I wanted to come towards you once again. India, we used to know, of course, it used to be secular India. It used to have its secular constitution. But if, today's India we talk about, there are barriers. And the barriers are being created, just because of one reason, that today's India sees itself as an Hindu state rather than a secular state, if I'm not wrong. And do you not think that one by one, all of the minorities, they will be facing these kind of restrictions and barriers which never existed in secular India before, but now we will be seeing it? Shiva?
See, normatively, India is a constitutional democracy. Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
So India is a secular democracy. It also claims to be a secular constitutional democracy, wherein whatever you have said, that is one part of it. But at the same time, still the minorities of India can claim their rights through Supreme Court or through various lower courts. Now, the best part about this decision is that it allows the minorities of India to question how come in a secular institution, in public institution, the establishment of temples, the establishment of other Hindu deities, and the Saraswati Puja that is carried out in the schools, in the secular schools or government-run schools are taking place. Now the minorities will be able to question the secular credentials of all these institutions after this verdict has come from the Karnataka High Court. So in a way, it is an enabling.
Ms. Shiva, help me understand something. Don't you think that this is a slippery slope, because this is eventually this can potentially eventually go towards a disastrous situation if we keep on moving towards such bans? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that you think that the decision is a good one, and it helps the educational institutions in some way or the other, and particularly the minorities, which I'm not sure I clearly understand.
And secondly, you were talking about your country as a secular democracy, and then you were referring to minorities. Usually in secular polity, you're not supposed to have any minorities. So what exactly is going on there? Yeah, please go ahead.
So the constitution doesn't define any religious minority. a minority is not a permanent kind of a term. It is a transitional term, and it is in the context of linguistic minorities that Constitution talks about minorities. That is one thing. Talking about the slippery, slope. Yes, in between only we are trying to manipulate, or we are trying to maneuver our own interests through legal activism. And Dr. John Dayal is with us, and he knows that how it is very important for us to be able to go to the court to seek our rights and seek the constitutional guarantees. This particular verdict will enable the secularization and the freedom from the majoritarian, things that are taking place in India in many secular institutions. That is one thing.
How?
See,
How?
Right, and I think
the
the
question.
how.
Can you qualify that?
Yeah, let me say, in most of the schools, secular schools, government schools, there are certain practices that have been made as the common sense of the masses, but they are rooted in the Sanatan tradition. And they are accepted
Dr.
as
Dayal?
the
Actually, I want to
culture
ask
or tradition of
Dr.
India.
Dayal the how part,
if you-
because
if you allow
perhaps
me.
he can help us understand how this
Yeah.
can actually happen.
If you can allow me, Dr. Dayal, I just wanted to
Let
ask
him
you.
just answer that, and
Yeah.
we'll come back to him again.
No. As somebody who has been part of the struggle for expanding the scope and the constitutional guarantees on freedom of religion, which I must tell you have been eroded right from 1950 when the presidential order came on scheduled castes. They have been eroded successfully by governments, but at the very massive pace which the BJP governments, both with Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee and now with Mr. Modi, they have galloped. The threat is palpable and it is now. It is on anything. The new education policy, if you go through it, gives local bodies like the RSS, who find their members on the governing bodies of schools, to dictate, oversee, and define how they will be managed. So even if Christians, Catholics run a school, let's say in Madhya Pradesh, the local community, which is very pro BJP, will be dictating, and they have dictated. Catholic school upon Catholic school and colleges have been told to put up statues of the Hindu goddess of education. I have nothing against goddesses, certainly against goddesses of education, I have nothing to say. But almost every aspect of my life as a minority is being encroached upon, eroded upon, and excised. Very important sections. That worries me. And as far as a trust in courts, we always say we trust in the judiciary. But we also know that justice is in a particular bench. Benches differ in judgments on the same issue. And we have seen this X number of times, particularly on gender issues and freedom of religion issues. And this, and crimes, when a Muslim is to be punished or a Christian is to be punished under UAPA or something, how will a bench define? So you called it a slippery slope. I'll go a step further. As a very worried Catholic, I'll say, this is a very catch-22. And in this catch-22, I don't see very many bright spots.
So, Dr. Dayal, as earlier our friend from India, Sheba, she has been, highlighting the fact that this case could be used as a precedent for, going against even the Hinduism. There are different practices within the schools and within the colleges that are taking place, and there are, the syllabus. In the syllabus, there are so many things that are included. Could we say that all of this, using this as a precedent by the Muslims or by other minorities in the courts against the Hindus, it would lead to further, confrontation between all of them?
It will be catastrophic and it will not be feasible, because the moment you take one of those cases to a court, they will treat it as culture and not religion. And the membrane between culture and religion is very porous. You can't define exactly what will be cultural as it is. Hindutva is supposed to be a way of life. It is not a religion, but that is the ruling by the Supreme Court. We have also seen how various other issues have been adjudicated in the highest court. So for me to presume as a litigant from the Catholic Christian community that I'll be able to use Karnataka as as case law for future litigation on the Dalit issue against the NEP, on just now many churches are being taken over because the lease is running out. It was done by the British. I mean, there are X number of issues on which I need to go to court. And to think that I can take this as a buffer, as an armor to guard me against this, I mean, I would I don't think it would be very wise to go down that road.
All right, Ms. Sheba, just like you said earlier, that of course that when you say that you don't support hijab, there must be many women who do actually and want to. The violation is really the same. The feeling is really the same when something is imposed upon a person who does not wish to do that. When we talk about not just schools, but in general the population in India and other parts of the world, be it of any faith, and they want to be able to practice their religion or move about their lives the way they want to, and they can't do it, and then when that comes from institutions and the state and the life itself actually becomes difficult. Isn't that supposed to be something that is a problem for the people there who actually experience this? Because when we talk about this case in particular, we can also generalize it and see it in a much larger sense of how it can have an impact on curtailing the daily lives of people of any religion.
And Sheba, if we can add, what is more important? Girls going to school or girls getting restricted to wear hijab?
I'll answer you first. Girls going to school, getting educated is the most important, the paramount aim and objective of any society. And having said that, the second part that was asked by your colleague, there is no restriction on hijab or abaya or anything in general. So when you are talking in general, there isn't any restriction. The restriction is reasonable restriction only in the classroom. So we have to understand, we have to qualify that you can come to your school, college, enter into the premises with your hijab.
The lines are blurred.
And Sheba Sahaba, since earlier Dr. Dayal was particularly talking about this becoming case law,
yes,
I am interested in another aspect as well, the concept of agency. I understand that, of course, the states and schools have their rights and they can actually impose whatever laws they want to, but it is basically not, up to the child or the girl to decide whether she wants to wear a particular cloth or not, and whether it is going to apply later on to other faiths as well. For example, Sikhs who usually wear turbans, or similar other faiths who might actually choose to wear a cross or something similar. Is it not going to muddle the culture of the country itself?
As far as the Sikh turban is concerned, it was decided much earlier in Supreme Court of India that this one particular aspect is essential part of Sikh religion, and therefore they will be allowed this. But the other symbols were not. The other symbols of Sikh religion was not allowed. Another thing is the concept of agency. So when we see a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old or 10-year-old Muslim girl child wearing hijab, where is this agency? You are already, brainwashing the kid into an ideology. Where is the agency?
Hang on. I love this train of argument, because it takes me back to Fareed Zakri, Orientalism and similar kind of works, where it was especially said that there are certain people who cannot represent themselves, somebody else will have to decide on their behalf. It seems at this moment what you are saying is that the girls who are Muslim are so subjected to benighted culture that they cannot choose for themselves, and therefore the society should choose for them.
I don't know if I am audible to you.
So,
yes, we can hear you. We can even hear the azan.
And perhaps
let a human being attain puberty, balaghat, and then let her decide. Why are you making them wear? Why are you making it a
hang on.
You're
You're telling me that the girls who have actually been the petitioners are not pubescent, or they're not adults?
They are pre-university students. They are 16, 17, 18 years old. They are
okay, so
at the verge
is
of,
there a delaying mechanism in adulthood here that we are talking about?
It was you agency that that manner. Otherwise, I support every woman's right to wear hijab if she wants to. Nobody is denying that, sir. All one is saying
All
is that
right,
in
so
the
Ms.
classroom, you
Sheba,
have
we're
to.
both saying the same thing. Essentially, what we're saying is that the choice is important, and perhaps you're not seeing the other part of that choice as well. It is also a matter of choice whether someone wants to wear a hijab or not. And Mr. Dayal, when we speak about the aspect of choice, then the argument of whether or not it is an essential part of any religion is redundant, because at the end of the day, it's not about that anymore. Even if we take away that religious aspect, at the end of the day, it's about choice, and something that we've discussed at length before as well. I also want to touch upon Islamophobia in general. Of course, it's the International Day Against Islamophobia, and similarly, phobia towards any particular religion as well. We can also see and understand principally what it is in that term as well, so that perhaps we are more empathetic towards Muslims and people who practice Islam and the way that they're treated with reference to Islamophobia. This, of course, also stems from a fear when you discriminate the other and you categorize them as something which you're not. And because of that difference, such measures are taken. And then when they're taken on a level which comes from institutions in the state, it's problematic to a higher aspect. This is a very difficult thing to curtail. How do we move forward with that?
Earlier in the debate, you mentioned when you were referring to Islamophobia, you mentioned France. I mean, I'd like to point out right away in any discussion on Islamophobia, India is not the US, is not England, certainly is not France. Here, when you target any religious minority, other religious minorities ipso facto feel targeted, even if a large chunk of them, even if very many Catholics in Kerala may be Islamophobic.
Mr. Dayal, I'm sorry, I'll have to interrupt. We have to go to a short break, and I'll be back and we'll continue the conversation. Welcome back to the debate. Earlier we were talking about Islamophobia and, of course, this being an international phenomenon and how different states in the world are dealing with it. Mr. John Dayal, you were talking about this with reference to France.
No, I was just saying that you had referred to France, and I was saying that the Indian situation is very different from anywhere in the world, including the US, which has every nationality represented there. You'd recall that even in the US, Islamophobia, particularly after in the wake of the Trade Towers disaster, even Sikhs were attacked because superficially, with the beard and turban, to some eyes, they looked like Muslims. In India, there are two major differences. India is, as Shiva said, a constitutionally secular state. It is not a Hindu nation. All of us are equal that way. And my argument has been consistently that any rise in Islamophobia eventually redounds and recoils on all other minorities. It's a small issue like beef, for instance. We all know
Dayal,
why the
I'm just, wanted to actually seek further of your comment regarding Islamophobia as being part of actually this hate towards all Abrahamic faiths. It seems that in India, especially because of the dog whistles that have been used, in Islam, of course, they are going to refer to Mahmud of Ghazna and similar kind of historic figures. In Christianity also, we have seen that especially they keep on talking about property and churches and their control of property. And then Judaism, of course, also is something where it seems that in India, today's India, Hitler by certain quarters are celebrated rather than his victims. So do you think that when you talk about particularly India, and earlier I was referring to Edward Said and his book, Orientalism, do you think that there is a possibility that this kind of trend will continue in India and it will become further a bigger problem in coming days, sir?
It is inevitable, not only when the issue is religion, but as somebody else mentioned, I think the moderator mentioned, when you're talking of xenophobia, racism, eventually they end up recoiling on everybody else. Racism was against blacks. Hispanics ended up being targets, and many Hispanics, many South Europeans are as fair as, well, even some Nordics or some Italians. But it ends up like that. And anything that hurts Islam and Muslims in India will tomorrow, inevitably, as night is night and day is day, will hurt Christians the day after. Aaj Kasai, Kal Isai was a slogan in 1998 in Gujarat when they destroyed 36 churches on the eve of Christmas, which was a laboratory, all of us said. Aaj Isai, Kal Kasai. And that is unfortunately the bitter truth. You are off the mark slightly when you say the state is Hindutva. The government thinks it is. The state, and all of us know it is not so. The constitution is secular. But the government of the day thinks it has a mandate to make it Hindutva, whether it is a law and
Dr. Dayal, unfortunately, we're almost out of time. I just have a quick question from Ms. Shiba before we conclude. When we talk about Islamophobia, Ms. Shiba, and what we were saying earlier as well, don't you think that the fear of the other also stems from the kind of decisions that have taken place in Karnataka?
Shiva?
Ms. Shiba, can you hear me? Unfortunately, I think
there seems to be communication
have lost her.
problem.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dayal and Ms. Shiba, for joining us in the debate and being a part of the show. We only have time now to move on to our second segment. In terms of what we've discussed also with reference to Islamophobia, it's an important aspect to also discuss the kind of ways that propaganda is being spread around the world and what needs to be done about it. And it's not just with reference to what is going on within one's country as well, but also when we talk about the world politics at large, the way that things are being propagated and talked about has an impact on the way they're understood, and then of course has an impact on the way that solutions are presented to problems. And when we don't understand the problems, we can't really come up with solutions that actually address those problems. So when we talk about issues such as Islamophobia and other campaigns, Farrukh, what do you think in terms of the measures that Pakistan has taken already, not just in terms of Islamophobia, but in terms of being able to talk about issues at length and bring them to light on multiple fora, whether it's Islamophobia or Kashmir or other issues with regards to propaganda campaigns? Do you think that the efforts have been fruitful, and if we can do anything more about it?
Right, and that is actually the nub of the gist of the problem, and I tell you why. Because when you look at Muslim world, it is divided into two very interesting camps. One is actually advocating Muslims' right to have these symbols, which are very important to Muslims, right? Hijab and everything else, and all those symbolisms. The other side, like me, is talking about the human rights of the Muslims all over the world and their ability to be safeguarded by other people. My problem is that in the past 20 years, there has been something very fascinating and disturbing simultaneously because of the war on terror, and because the countries that were involved, they started associating Muslims, not Islam, with terrorism, and that's why they have been subjected to a lot of violence. And then two countries that were actually facing the confrontation from some kind of Muslim freedom movement, Palestine, Israel, and then India. These two have actually joined forces, and they have started actually educating or informing Islamophobia in the West as well. But the problem then is that essentially the Islamophobia that you see today is essentially a part of anti-Semitism. We are merely in the way. Actual enemy is going to be Judaism. So in the end, it all translates into that, and there has to be a correction. Pakistan is so far advocating the symbols. I think we need to focus more on human rights.
Right. Let me also welcome in the debate Brigadier Retired Rashid Wali Jindua, who's the president of APRI. Thank you so much for joining us. When we talk about issues with reference to propaganda, we've also heard a statement coming in from the Chief of Army Staff saying that needs to be collective action. Earlier, we were also talking about Islamophobia, since it is the International Day Against Islamophobia. And there's, of course, a lot of propaganda against different religions and different issues as well, which need to be countered, which is, of course, an important aspect of countering Islamophobia as well. But when we talk about the need for collective action, what sort of challenges are there in place for that, and what sort of a collective action can there be? Is it just in terms of the people and parties within our own country, or is it also with regards to states in different parts of the world who are actually standing up against discrimination, whether or not it is their religion?
You see, the biggest challenge now is Pakistani mind, which is being targeted. The new battlefield, indeed, is the Pakistani mind. And there are challenges there. We need to create capabilities to fight this information warfare. And information warfare, there are information operations, cyber operations, and influence operations. There's a conductor, there's a target, and there is a platform. New technologies, the social media platforms, artificial intelligence, machine learning, they have amplified the capabilities, and it's very easy to sow discord, very easy to create dissensions, and it's a continual barrage of lies that our adversary is using through these platforms in order to deny us international coalition support, in order to sow divisions amongst us. In order to create resilience against all that, we need to create capacities as well as be aware of those challenges, because it's a well-known maxim that a lie goes around the world in as much time as the truth has time to put on its boots. So these are the challenges of digital media age, and the digital warriors, they need to be co-opted into this effort, and we need to create awareness amongst our population also, which is a unwitting consumer of this barrage of lies, so as not to get unduly influenced and to create a kind of
and one last question also, Brigadier Saab. When we talk about the human mind and the Pakistani mind, like you mentioned, of course, we also know, and as you mentioned, with the current age and the way things are going, and something that has been talked about by the Chief of Army Staff as well, is that the youth has a lot of potential and that we need to focus on development of the human resource. But of course, a large part of that also entails developing human minds and being able to inculcate in them an ability to critically analyze and understand different concepts and deconstruct different concepts. And that also means that we allow room to be able to question things, for them to be able to understand them. Is that something that we're doing on a national scale, perhaps?
Right, and very quickly, Brigadier Saab, since you were talking about digital warriors, this is a very good question. Is it important to first keep on fighting the propaganda with other voices, or to actually inculcate the capacity of critical thought in children and people, so that they are able to tell the two things apart?
That's a very important point that you've highlighted. Equipping those people who are incapable of critical thinking, incapable of original thinking and distinguishing right from wrong, would not yield those dividends that would accrue from first creating a habit of critical thinking, creating those capacities, and then enabling those capacities through those digital media age technologies, using fully leveraging artificial intelligence, machine learning.
All right. I'm so sorry to interrupt, Brigadier Saab, but we're unfortunately out of time. We'll hopefully continue this conversation some other day. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching the debate. We'll see you tomorrow once again at 7:05 only on PTV World.